Hi, welcome. This is episode 3 of Tolerable Politics. Today we're going to be talking about the riots that have happened at Capitol Hill. Lots to talk about, lots of things to discuss. Today I have here with me Sam Fedez in the bottom, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yo, it's me again. The main man, the myth, and the legend. I was here last week. Um, uh, my views are pretty centered. I you know, don't really like the government right now. Overall, I don't like the people. I like the systems and all that. Um, it's kind of silly what's going on now. Kind of in the middle of everything. So yeah.
Alright, and we got Breck and Lusk in the top left.
Kind of weird with my political beliefs, so I'm probably just not going to go into them. I guess you'll just as we go.
Alright, and yeah, so for starters, I would like to talk about kind of just the facts and what we know so far to be confirmed about the events that have happened at Capitol Hill. So I'm probably just gonna go monologue for a little bit, and then we can discuss everything. Make sure we all agree. So for starters, obviously people protested. I'm gonna call it a riot because a large part of it was a riot. The Capitol
Yeah,
building,
because it was.
yeah, the Capitol building was invaded, and there was damage to property, damage to
Introducing
people.
Grove's line of plastic free
Hang
home
on,
cleaning
something
products
is
designed to
happening.
help solve the single use
Hang
plastic
on.
problem. With 100% natural
Okay,
Is the
sorry.
stream
I
getting messed up?
I got an ad from a tab I had open. Sorry about that. All right. So yeah, we have the people invading the Capitol, damage to property, damage to people. As far as I know, there are 5 people dead, 2 from violence and 3 from natural causes, as far as we know. There was a cop who got killed. We don't know what
Five people.
injuries. Yeah, 5 people. 3 with natural causes,
Okay.
and 2 were genuinely killed. So the cop, there was one cop that died. They uh, apparently were injured in a scuffle with some rioters and died in the hospital. There was the Air Force veteran who was shot and killed, and then we had the 3 others. I believe one had a heart attack, died of the hypertension, and then 2 other people died, and we don't have their information out in the public yet. But as far as we can tell, it's of natural
Question.
causes.
I'd always heard four people. Did the fifth just die of his wounds
Uh,
or his or
the
her wounds?
the fifth is the cop. I think is the most recently is the most recent one. I'm not sure. It's 4 civilians plus 1 officer. I've heard the 4 number, but just on Google the 5 was being thrown around a lot. So yeah, three civilian or 4 civilians, one of them being a veteran, and then the officer. Um, Again, 2 of those were murders. I'm not sure that really changes much because it was still 5 deaths, which is very bad. But it is something to take note of. The pipe bomb situation as well. As far as we know, those were planted before the riot happened, and it might have been someone who like a Trump supporter. We don't know who it was. We have no information on that. I'm not going to claim it was. I'm not going to claim it wasn't. I have no idea. But what we do know is they did most likely have violent intent planting pipe bombs and Molotov cocktails at the Capitol. So whoever that was, not
Good job.
yeah,
It was
yeah,
for decoration, man. Like, what do you
yeah.
mean?
So yeah,
All right.
it's most of the
Is that all
information.
the information that you want to give, or
I believe that's all
one
the
more?
information. We can kind of talk about it now. So
Um. Okay. I'll start off with a question and introduce the discussion, right?
mm,
So for these riots, right? Um, I'm curious on what your guys' opinion is on whether or not it was well, of course, it was a bad thing, but whether or not there was good at all in it. And what I mean by that is, it kind of shows how the people can kind of come up against the government if it calls for it.
mhm.
And they took the Capitol building, right? That's pretty big.
Yeah,
And I'm not saying it was a good thing, but I think it's also kind of interesting that we as Americans still have the power to do something like
Yeah.
I do have something. It's not necessarily how it's good, but how it's not as some people have said. I've
Mhm.
heard a lot of arguments that they're being hypocritical in that they were against BLM protests, which burned down uh, businesses.
Mhm.
But on that end, I would bring up what each side values the most. The right, the people that were at the Capitol, value the private sector more than anything. So they think that BLM attacking those businesses is the worst thing they could possibly do,
Mhm.
while they feel that taking it to the Capitol where the problem actually is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
While conversely, on the left, they view the public sector as the most important. So them going on the public sector is more important to them than the business getting burnt down.
Yeah. That's a very interesting
That's
take.
how.
Yeah. You can go ahead,
Mm,
Vetter, sorry.
Well, that's just how they're not being hypocritical.
Yeah.
Because I have heard that thrown around.
Mhm. So, like my thought on it is most people, are going to support when their ideologies are being advocated for in whatever way that is, even if it's through means of violence. And if you disagree with the person's policies who's, doing the advocating, obviously you're always going to think it's a bad thing. So, I mean, it could have been Nazis, marching and doing that violence, and obviously, if that were the case, most right wingers and most people who support the president would not be okay with that, and they'd strictly oppose it and say it was, as bad as BLM and whatnot. When in reality, it's mainly just a riot, and it is something that needs to be mentioned that this riot did have a higher like per capita death than BLM riots. BLM riots were much more widespread and they were on a much larger scale. So I'm not really sure which one is worse, if either one of them is genuinely worse. But both of these things are bad. Both are people using violence for political motive, and I mean, all of these rioters are genuine terrorists by definition. So.
Further on that point of comparing them, I did some research, and this actually has more deaths than any single riot in BLM.
Mm,
And there was four, it did tie for one of the days, but now that there's five,
yeah.
it actually goes over it. June 1st, what there were four BLM deaths, but there are four separate uh, protests across the country. So that was the
Hmm.
highest day for deaths,
Yeah.
though no one protest had this many.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that this was a more violent protest. It had, as I said, a much higher per capita death rate. But again, it isn't as widespread, so there's much more widespread violence and things happening with BLM, whereas this is like more violence just concentrated in one area. I think they're also trying to, do two very separate and different things. This one was probably intended to be more violent because they're trying to, take the capital, whereas BLM protests were protests that eventually turned violent after certain events happened. So,
I
I don't
think one
know.
way there should
Um,
have been a lot more deaths, but
mhm.
with BLM or with the Capitol?
uh, a lot of people are complaining about how the officers didn't do anything, which is a major issue. But then also there would have been so many more if they did, because so many of the
Yeah.
protesters were armed, which is a lot more dangerous. And we don't know what would have happened if the officers had actually gone harder against them.
Mhm.
Well,
Possibly,
it's kind of just like general police response protocol. Like if you look at the BLM riots, there was very little police intervention for the first day, or well, for the first night, I suppose. There was some, of course,
Mhm.
but it wasn't as widespread as towards the final days where they were really cracking down. They said enough is enough. And so, um, you know, of course, the police response wasn't good enough with either situation, but um, I've seen a lot online, like a lot. Like probably the biggest thing I've seen about this is how the police response was racist
Mhm.
for this, for the Capitol riot versus the the one for BLM. And I'm curious to see what you guys have to think about that. I think that's a huge topic, especially like on social media right now. I'm not sure if
Mhm.
any of you guys have seen it, but I've seen it like literally all over the
Yeah,
place.
for sure. So, I'm just gonna go ahead and give my take. So I understand the concern that like there's more police response to the BLM protests and riots than there were this riot, The only thing, like the major difference between these two things is going to be the scale. So BLM protests had been happening for a while, and they were known to get violent. So we knew we had to have protections in police forces that are ready to deal with violent individuals. Whereas this was kind of like a spur of the moment protest. I will admit it was planned ahead of time, and that is there was an issue with the police system, which I'll get into later. But just for the sake of this argument, it happened much faster, and we didn't know how violent it was going to get. So the police force didn't have like adequate time to really prepare for a violent situation. Um, I mean, you have to compare this to the first day slash night of BLM protests and the police response to that. Like you can't really compare this to the entirety of it because we have one isolated situation compared to a very vast kind of like amount of protests and riots that happened under the BLM uh, time period. So it's
Arguably, though, the government should have more defense naturally
I
than a
mean
random street.
Yeah, I think that there was a very big issue with security, especially knowing that there was a Trump rally like what a few miles away. It was pretty dumb of them not to. To hear people talking about on internet forums that there was going to be like a riot happening or a protest happening at the Capitol, they should have had much higher security. And I think that's more due to the fact that the chief of police he had been the chief of police for about 5 days, and obviously somewhere in the police system, there was a very big error that happened where they either didn't believe there was going to be an actual protest, they didn't think that people were going to get violent, or something happened where the police just weren't prepared. Because I don't think it's a matter of these people are white, so we're just gonna let them take our Capitol building. I don't think that popped into someone who was born and raised in Washington D.C. as the chief of police. I don't think that's the motive there. I think that it's much more likely that there was some kind of error in the system that happened, and I'd be much more encouraged to find that error and fix it um, rather than worry about a racist issue because I really don't think that's realistic. Someone in
I
okay, go ahead, Bracken.
I think that the issue they're looking for is again what I said earlier about there being weapons in the crowd that would mean a lot of officer deaths and even innocent deaths if there was action against it. And then furthermore, this was the very first day of protesting for this, if you're comparing it to BLM, the very first day the military was called. For BLM, it was months until the military was called in because there was constant
Oh yeah, I
uh,
totally forgot about that.
violence going over and over again. But
Mm.
this one, it was only a couple hours and the National Guard was called in and a mandatory curfew was enforced. So there was a lot more action in that aspect than people give credit for.
Mm.
And it was a very dangerous position for the officers to be in.
Yeah. So someone in chat said, "Is that an excuse for not pushing back against protesters?" So that's not the excuse. That's more just saying like there was a flaw and there wasn't enough security to a push back against the protesters, and b the main reason why there wasn't so much pushback against protesters is because usually for riots slash protests, uh, the best kind of way to approach the situation is to kind of just let them burn out. I mean, we saw that happen a lot with BLM protests, where they just enforced a curfew and kind of let the rioters do their thing until they ended up clearing out and just kind of got burnt out. That's what they did here, and that's what tends to happen with a lot of these protests. Again, you can compare this to some of the worst and most militant cases our government had to, shut down a BLM uh, protest slash riot with. But we can also compare it to the least amount of action those protests have had as well, and that is little to no police slash military action at all. Um, so again, we're comparing. We can compare this instance to the most fringe of the BLM riots and protests, but I think that we can look at the methods they used and see that they're used consistently, no matter what political group is doing the protesting. It's just let this burn out. We're not gonna send in a bunch of tear gas. We're not gonna send in a bunch of riot cops in riot gear before the curfew, and we're just gonna let them kind of tire themselves out. And that usually is a pretty effective way of dealing with this kind of thing. And obviously, there were some deaths that ended up resulting from this, but it could have been a lot more, especially if the police did try to intervene and start doing things because these people were armed, and while most of them did not use their weapons, it very realistically could have gone much more south than it did. So I think it was handled in a very good way for this situation.
And I want to clarify that we're
Well,
not
real quick,
defending them for being
Ashton, you
armed.
need to change your title on your Twitch.
Is
It's talking about the COVID bill.
Oh yeah, it is. That's weird.
After this stream,
Yeah.
you can like give me mod or something because I know how to do all that stuff.
Okay. There we go. Update information. Okay, I think it should be
Again,
good now.
we're not defending the people for having guns because that is extremely dangerous and why the
I mean, they're
military.
using their Second Amendment rights. It's kind of like legal.
Well, storming the Capitol.
When protesting, I'm not like saying that it's fine, right? But they were legally protected.
Not necessarily. The
Well,
people who use their weapons were
borderline.
not legally protected to
Well,
begin
yeah,
with.
of course. I mean,
And
yeah.
if they're not abiding by local like concealed carry slash open carry laws, then they aren't also not protected by the law. So I'm sure the vast majority of people there with weapons probably were not abiding by the law.
It's illegal. It can be classified as terrorism,
Mhm.
and it is bringing up a lot of talk of revolution.
Yeah, and also do keep in mind brandishing a firearm is against most gun laws in most places, and I'm sure in Washington D.C. brandishing a firearm is very illegal. I could look that up real quick, but I
Most
can almost
likely,
guarantee.
yeah. No, DC is pretty strict on that stuff. I'm
Yeah,
not saying that it's like, yeah, I don't know.
it's like back to kind of the point of like seeing people, take the capital, and is that like a good thing? Like that's the point of 2A, right? That's why it's there. I think that like yeah, this was a showcase that we can go to the Capitol, and we could have, if people really wanted to, they could have killed a lot of senators if they really wanted to. Yeah, that can happen, but I don't think that this was like a representation of how you can actually overthrow a government. Like the U.S. citizens didn't deal with a military at all; they just kind of went to Capitol Hill without any kind of response
Arguably,
at
though,
all.
it showed the world how easy it is to get in, and you can
Mhm.
see pictures of them easily climbing over the wall, them easily getting into the building and
Mhm.
facing no resistance.
Yeah.
So anyone that wanted to sabotage the government for terrorist or political means
Mhm.
just get 30 people involved and make sure from some people's perspective that they're all white and then make sure they're armed and you can get in, do whatever you want.
Well, like I don't know. I think for starters, like I think isn't the Capitol building open to the general public in general, just to kind of go observe
Yeah,
it?
it's
So
yes,
But they were
and
getting into
also like,
restricted areas.
yeah,
well,
they're getting to
it's like
restricted
the
areas, but
entire. Okay, well, it's like, what are you gonna do against hundreds of thousands of people, right? Like,
mhm.
I'm not sure exactly how many people were there, but
It
like,
was a lot of
they
people.
could have
Yeah.
taken it, right? The entire security team for the Capitol building resigned and stuff, right? But
Mhm.
like, realistically, what were they supposed to do?
Yeah.
Like, there were these people with firearms outside, right? Like, if you wanted to get into the Capitol building, you probably could with enough people. It really doesn't
Mhm.
matter. Like, it was just an unfortunate situation, and I really wouldn't blame the security or the police for that kind of stuff because, well, the police maybe they could have responded
Yeah,
quicker, but
that's the issue I have. I think there was a very big problem with the police personally. I think that's where the issue lies. Is we could have had a much better
mm,
and like quicker
yeah,
and more forceful police response to kind of clear people out sooner. But I
Well,
I, I
I
think
would argue that it's more on the security because it's the police's job to keep the streets safe,
mhm,
and they can't do much if they are being peaceful at first.
mhm.
They're not supposed to do much. But once they start breaking into a specific building, then it's the security's job to keep them at bay
Yeah.
and out of restricted areas.
So yeah, I do think like again it's kind of like it's a building open to the public, and it's not necessarily supposed to be this like secure bunker for senators. Like it is supposed to be an open area, because as in democracy, especially for elected officials, it's important for anyone to be able to go in and see what they're kind of deciding on and see who's voting which way, that kind of thing. Like that's an important thing for the public. So it is supposed to be like an open to the public type of deal, and I'm sure like maybe they should invest in like a lower bunker that the senators can go to in case violent people end up being outside. And I'm sure they should probably increase the security a bit so they can barricade some doors easily or something like that in the case of this happening again. But I don't think we need to like make it some kind of military fortress. I think it still should be open to the public as usual, and I think it's a matter of just like maybe having a plan for something like this happening to ensure the safety of these senators because
instead of
yeah,
going under your desk.
yeah, exactly. So I think I've
And as a
good.
sorry, as a response to a question you had earlier about how many were there,
Mhm.
there is no specific number, but the members who were there are being identified, and many of them are losing their jobs because of it.
Yeah, and that's really good. Like these people are choosing to do things that like I don't know when it comes to council culture and stuff, it's usually bad. But if you're talking about genuine terrorists, like yeah, they shouldn't be keeping their
Well,
jobs.
then there's the argument that a lot of BLM use is that not everyone there is trying to be violent. A lot of them
Yeah,
are just there for a purpose. Like the reason for the virus, not virus, the reason for the protest on paper is that they feel that the election is fraudulent, including the senator ones, which was supposed to be the last straw for this.
hmm
So many of them supposedly are there for a peaceful reason. So should everyone that was there be reprimanded for being there?
yeah. No, obviously not. It should be the people like blatantly caught on camera, committing violence or walking on private property and stuff. The people who commit genuine criminal offenses should be punished for it, socially, professionally, and legally. But the people there protesting and being part of like taking part in a protest that turns into a riot doesn't make you a rioter. You're still there protesting. So I don't think that everyone caught on camera should like lose their jobs, but definitely if you did anything illegal that day, you should be punished for it. By whatever means you end up being punished for it. Yeah.
Because 82 have been arrested so far.
Okay.
And that's not including people who've lost their jobs.
Yeah. Is that general people who are like there, like outside of the building protesting, or is that people who are caught on camera inside the building breaking laws?
Uh, all I
Those
know is
were
that there
arrests made on the
are,
day. 82 people
yeah,
were arrested on the day.
Yeah, and I figure most of them are people who are doing illegal things, not necessarily just protesting out
Yep.
on the street. So I'm not too worried
Well,
about them.
right to protest. It's not like,
Pro-
people should never lose their job to for protesting, right? Even if
protesting,
it turns riot or
protesting
violent.
and riot. If they're the ones who are committing the violence, they should lose their job. If being
Well,
part of a
inciting
protest.
violence and protesting is two very different things, right?
Well, I mean,
So,
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Is if they're at a protest that turns violent and they are one of the people who are being violent, they deserve to be punished for it. If they're at a protest and it turns violent and they're just there protesting, they don't deserve to be fired for it, right? Like the people who are doing illegal things and committing violence should be punished for that, and the people who are there not doing any of that should be punished. I mean, I think that personally, political opinion should be a protected kind of class under like the Civil Rights Act. That might just be me, but I think that open discourse of political opinion is extremely important, and we need to protect it. But those that do commit crimes should be punished for it always. So, either you want to comment on that, or are we good to move on?
effect do you think this will have on protests in the future?
Protests in the future? I think it won't have much of an effect. I think this is like basically all this was just really really bad for Trump and the people who got arrested, obviously. But yeah, I don't think this is gonna have any kind of large effect on protests. I think it's gonna give people the knowledge, like, hey, if we get people together, we can riot and do all these kinds of things at important places. But I'm not sure that would have a genuine effect on anything in the future. I'm not too worried about seeing many more violent protests. If we do see more, that's obviously going to be very unfortunate, but I don't think it's going to be caused by this.
Well,
I
the reason I ask is because recently on news sources that I've listened to, they've started using protests and riots synonymously, and expect and anything that is a protest, they start describing violence for.
What do you mean? Anything that's protest? What do you mean by that?
Every protest with the later months of BLM, and then with this, the word protest has the expectation that it's going to go sour.
Um, I can kind of see that. I think that it's just kind of like a misuse of the word. I guess if people could start referring to this, like the riots as protests, and that can change the meaning of the word. But bottom line, like if we're talking about its effect on protests, we're not talking about protests by its current definition. We're talking about a change in the definition of the word, which could happen, but the group of people peacefully, I guess you could say it'll be peacefully protesting versus protesting, right? So all it's going to do is shift that regular protest over to be called like a peaceful protest. That's the only difference that would really happen. And maybe it'll become a bit more socially acceptable, but I kind of doubt that. I think most people are pretty unhappy with the violence happening on both sides of the political spectrum. So I don't see it becoming any more like socially acceptable by any means. I think it's mainly going to stay the same. As I said, the definition might change, but its meaning is still going to remain the same mainly.
Hmm. Do you mind if I share why I think that this really hurts everyone at the protest and what they stand for?
Yeah, go for it.
So, for the most part, the people there officially were Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to use their ideologies for this.
Yeah.
So, much of their are very proud of how innocent they were and
Mm-hmm.
like being so peaceful about their protests and talking about how we are mature whenever our candidate loses.
Mm-hmm.
And then you look at this event and they gave all of that up more violently
Mm-hmm.
than BLM ever has.
Yeah.
Well, when a protest for a cause turns into a riot, it basically ruins that cause, right? The BLM protest basically ruined BLM for most people,
Mm-hmm.
as most people were kind of, of course, they supported prosecution of the officer who killed George Floyd.
Mm-hmm.
But once, places started to get burned down, then a lot of people lost support for the movement.
Yeah.
It's the same thing for this, where if they remained peaceful, it could have been a really great protest for the Republican Party. But since it turned violent, it really ruined a lot for what they were trying to do and what they were trying to achieve. That's
Mm-hmm.
just kind of, how it goes. It
Yeah.
doesn't really matter what cause you're for or what party you're on.
I think.
And then,
Yeah, oh, good.
yeah, I just have more. If you're continuing on that, then you
Uh,
can before I
y-
go on.
yeah. So like my general take on politics in general is most politicians and most people in politics very hypocritical. I mean, we saw the same thing at the Republican Party um, from when they expected Obama to not nominate a new justice to the Supreme Court, and Trump ended up getting another nomination, and then Trump nominated someone to the Supreme Court in pretty much the exact same situation. Um, just a lot of hypocrisy. People don't really care about being fair to the other side. I think they more care about what what will help them achieve their political goals more than anything. Um, and I think this is a very good example of anyone who thought that like Republicans were pure and thought that they weren't hypocrites or anything. I think this will hopefully be an eye opener to just go and show that like no, most of these people are just in it to benefit themselves. They aren't in it to be consistent or anything like that. So you're always going to see people complain when the other side fucks up, and then they'll just fuck up in the same way and expect it to be fine.
Which brings me to the next point of being pro police and then going like, well, if he just listened to the police then nothing would have happened.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have them openly disobeying the police on video. You
Yeah,
have them taking selfies with a police officer while ignoring him.
yeah,
And you also have what I just found out about this police officer dying, which would be something that they would have righted themselves if they heard about a bunch of cops dying during a BLM protest,
mm-hmm.
and they just killed one themselves.
Yeah. It it's very hypocritical, and I do think this will be a pretty big eye opener that like it. We just there's a lot of middle ground that you can find with people, not necessarily about their political opinions, but about how this country should be run. And I think most people agree that this kind of violence is just unacceptable, and we really need to come together and just no matter what your political beliefs are, even if you think that the Capitol should have been overthrown, like that's not the way to go about it.
Also, it's incredibly important to understand that, you know, it doesn't really matter the Republican Party. You know, I can't speak for the Republican Party, but I'm confident in my opinion that they don't really condone the murder of the police officer.
Hmm.
And to just not, it's kind of like the BLM protests where a lot of a lot of people just kind of tossed it up as riots
Mhm.
and didn't really try to get the message when there were like, the majority of people who were protesting were just protesting and they went home.
Mhm.
And then there were people who used the cover of protests to turn violent. So it's not like the Republican Party is the one who murdered the police officer. It was just, I don't know the scenario, but from what was described, either one guy or a bunch of dudes who just jumped a cop, right, and
Yeah.
during a protest setting. I don't think that's really what. That's probably 99% of the people there didn't want that.
Yeah, and again, like if you go to the Black Lives Matter protests too, I mean, the vast majority of those people were there peacefully protesting as well. Like,
Hmm.
uh, most of these people who participate in these things are not there for the violence. It's just that these things are able to kind of host violence, and it's just we need to really make those people who are violent socially unacceptable, and we need to discourage it and punish it properly. Yeah, I just think it's a very big issue. It kind of exemplifies the rising tensions in our country. We're starting to get more violent than we have been in the past, and yeah, I don't know. It's just it. We need some changes when it comes to
Yeah.
accepting this kind of violence.
No, that was my last point on how they were hypocritical, but my next points are about more how they help the left's views.
Hmm.
First, dealing again with the cops, even though we just talked about how it may not be racist, their reasonings, it sure didn't help that a whole bunch of white people just stormed the Capitol, which is arguably far worse than the street, and then got away with it scot free.
Hmm.
Are
So
they
that,
going to arrest every single person who stormed the Capitol? Like the thousands of people that went in? Like that's not going to happen. It's just impossible for cops to
I
do
mean,
it.
with like uh,
How are they?
at,
Where are they going to hold them and
like
stuff like that?
tear gas, riot shields brought in, people beaten,
Hmm.
Yeah,
like that.
but it's like, are they? It sucks because it was just a hard situation, right? The cops could have absolutely done better, but what are they going to do? Tear gas the Capitol building when they're in session, when civilians were inside of the building? Like it's just that's not reasonable to expect, right?
I think
It
that's
was a
reasonable to
very
expect.
I don't know
Not
with
everyone's going to
civilians and
think
stuff
that
like
same
that in
way.
there,
Well,
like
that's
with
who you're trying to like gas is those
no
people who
people
are.
like non-protesters, like because wasn't that like weren't people in session when
Yeah, and they all got rushed
all
to the
this
back
happened?
rooms before the people got into the main
Yeah.
area.
Yeah,
So all the people in
so
that area were the protesters slash rioters. I would consider everyone in the building a rioter because they were um, all on property
absolutely.
they weren't supposed to be. So tear gassing in there, I think, would be expected. I think that they should have arrested as many as possible. I think that's one big issue is like we need to crack down and just arrest as many of these people as possible to really make sure that they know they're going to be punished because like that will prevent some people from doing this kind of thing because a lot of them think they can get out scot free, and if you're willing to go do that and still accept the consequences, that's something that you're willing to do. But most people aren't willing to accept jail time over this kind of protest. So I think that having the expectation be that we're going to arrest as many as possible, I think that that would help with the situation and discourage people from doing illegal protests or riots. And
While we do
yeah,
make that, while we do make that argument, not everyone has heard that argument, and all they know is that the BLM did get treated that way, and then a bunch of white people didn't. So
yeah,
that doesn't look good.
yeah. Again, I think that the issue there is that that expectation was there. Again, my qualm is essentially there was something that wrong that happened at the police station, so they weren't prepared to do that kind of thing. I genuinely think there was just someone who either fucked up the information gathering and didn't assess it as an accurate threat, or there was an idiot who decided that they weren't going to deploy people for some reason or other. Again, I really don't think it's a racist issue. I think there was just something in the
It's
system that went
not.
wrong.
It's the well, as we've said before, like when BLM was very new, like the first night there was very little police response. Same thing for the first day of this, right? And still, the chief of police from Washington D.C. and like a lot of cops, like they're gonna have a problem. That's
Hmm.
how many cops resigned.
Yeah,
So I don't. They themselves aren't even happy with how they responded to the situation.
hmm,
And they know they could have done better.
yeah,
Um, it's just it's a hard situation to deal with.
hmm, yeah. It's
And even
good.
No, go ahead. I'm moving on to a next
Oh,
topic.
okay.
I don't want that.
I was just gonna say like yeah. Bottom line, like especially like a lot of the cops that resigned and stuff. I don't think that it was at their fault at all. It just bottom line there was something genuinely wrong with the system, and yeah, most you could probably ask any single individual in that police force, and they will say they fucked up. I don't know if they could tell you where they fucked up, but I guarantee everyone there is very unhappy with the way it was dealt with. And I don't think the issue was just all these cops just were okay with white people, storming the Capitol. I think it was more along the lines of there was a fuck up somewhere and they just weren't able to be prepared for it. So,
Even if it were to be widely accepted that they didn't respond because it would have been more dangerous to respond than to not respond. And that would make this next point even more prevalent. That it makes gun laws look really good right now. If
mm-hmm.
there was a protest with death, could not get put down because doing so would have made it more dangerous than not putting it down.
Yeah, I think it'll be really good for a lot of like Democrats or people that advocate for gun laws, because they can use some really big like emotional arguments right now. Obviously, we have statistics on gun laws, and it's supported that there should be like a longer waiting period and whatnot for buying a weapon. But I think most people agree that you should still be able to buy most weapons, that you can now at least, not necessarily military grade weapons. But it's gonna be a really bad look for gun laws, for the future, and God knows how long afterwards, because so many people are just going to point back to this event, and it's going to be really hard to convince some people who aren't necessarily educated on the facts, but they know about this protest that happened that turned violent into a riot with weapons.
Well,
So,
even if you are educated on it, the guns being present is a major issue.
uh, not necessarily. Guns being present, as long as they are, abiding by the local gun laws, I think is completely fine. I'm okay with people protesting with weapons. It kind of helps ensure their safety against people who might be violent in those protests. But I think that using them in a violent manner that is illegal obviously is the bad part. I don't think people protesting with firearms is necessarily a bad thing, but people brandishing those firearms, yeah, it's a bad thing. People firing those firearms, yeah, it's a bad thing. And
Like if they were concealed, I would agree. But if they're shown, that makes them intimidating,
well, that's
and it
that's
makes them
brandishing a firearm.
deal with.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, it's already illegal, so I'm not too concerned about it. Obviously, like yeah, like it's illegal and you can't stop these people from doing illegal things, and they were doing illegal things. So that's why again I think they should all be punished, because I think the issue is those that broke the law are probably not going to be held accountable, and that makes it much more attractive to do and much more doable for most people. It's a matter of we need to ensure that people are held accountable for breaking the law rather than make new laws that are probably just going to be broken themselves anyway, right?
and then it is ironic how, for the most part, the right is very pro-wall,
Mm.
and then they just show how ineffective the walls were at the Capitol by climbing over them. It was a meme
Uh,
that and
yeah, I mean it's kind of funny. Obviously, that has nothing
yeah,
to do with the actual efficacy of like a border wall, but that
like
you
it's
know,
not. I've seen that, and it's not like a pure representation, but it's just ironic.
oh yeah, for sure, it's pretty funny. I mean, you're gonna see a lot of hypocrisy out of this kind of thing. It's just it's a terrible look for the right here, and it was a terrible look during BLM for the left. So I think that
It's just bad all around.
yeah.
Politics in our nation's kind of screwed right now. Like, honestly, if you're, at least in my opinion, if you're like fully supporting one and, completely, I suppose, disowning another one, where like if you're on the right and you loved the Capitol riot and it was like, yeah, power to the people,
Mhm.
but then you hated the BLM stuff,
Yeah.
then, in my personal opinion, you're an idiot. If you
Hmm.
think that the BLM stuff was perfectly fine and that the riots and the protest and the violence was perfectly fine, but then, the Capitol, oh man, it's government buildings, that they should have been doing their jobs,
Hmm.
then you're also an idiot because, whenever violence is ever used in a protest, sure, I heard this during the BLM protests, how violence is, I think it's the speak of the unheard or the language of the unheard.
Yeah.
That's not a really good excuse of violence at
Hmm.
all, and you should. or at least in my opinion, you should try to be against both the situations, really.
Yeah.
You don't have to be against the protests, you just have to be against the riots.
Hmm. Yeah, it's like you can support the cause. Like you might believe that like Trump's election was completely fraudulent, completely rigged, and he didn't deserve to lose. And it's still no excuse to support this kind of violence happening. Um, you should get out there and you should genuinely prove it and convince people. That's the way to make this difference. If you are someone that genuinely believes that there is racism in the police force, that George Floyd's death was a really really terrible occurrence, which I think most people would agree with, and that people should be out there protesting, that doesn't mean you have to be okay with the violence happening there. You can say the violence is bad, but the protests were good. That's still completely logically consistent, and I think a lot of people kind of think they have to accept the violence and the protest at the same time, or neither, which is not the case. You can accept that that's an issue that needs to be advocated for, but not with violence. I think most people, or at least most reasonable people, would agree that violence is not it does not have a place in modern politics, not at all, especially in our country.
I would argue against that in some cases, but with this current circumstance and the reasoning, not there was no reason to get violent about it.
Yeah.
I don't know. My opinion is that there's really no justification for violence of any kind when it comes to protesting, no matter what. Whether or not that's arson or murder, it doesn't matter to me. I don't
Hmm.
think it should be used ever. People during the BLM protests to try to defend the rioting said that there's things like insurance companies, but those same people just really don't understand how basic economics works and how that's not really how it works at all. And that because a Gucci store was, robbed clean in Los Angeles, it's not like that doesn't affect Gucci.
Hmm.
And so it's like, as I said, I really can't think of really any situation where violence could be possibly justified, um, unless it's like the government is complete, like USSR government, who are just like murdering their people and
Hmm.
they're all starving to death. But clearly, that's not what's in the United States. I don't think we really have to worry about that. So I just can't find any
Yeah.
situation in my mind.
I think
I don't
I think there are situations where violence can be acceptable. I just think that those situations are very, very unrealistic for our current time period. So I mainly agree with you,
Exactly.
but I do think it is something you have to accept where there are definitely situations where violence is available, or violence is moral, I guess. In this
acceptable.
case, yeah. In this case, I definitely don't think it would be though. And in the BLM case, I also disagree that it was a necessity for that as well.
Another thing that they did that hurt them is they made Biden look very good in
Hmm.
the responses. Because if you look at Trump's response, he basically just tweeted, "I love you, please go home,"
Yeah.
which has been twisted out of proportion, and then also in the first place wasn't a great response.
Hmm.
But then Biden gave like a full, like actual thing about why they're wrong and like what should be happening right now,
Hmm.
and it made him look like a leader as compared to a man just going onto social media and writing a little sentence.
Yeah. I.
Same thing kind of happened with BLM protests, though.
Uh.
It's like with the responses of Biden and Kamala Harris, they weren't very like Trump. It's funny because it's like they're of course going to pick at the other party, right? And so Trump was going hardcore on the BLM protest, saying how unacceptable it was and calling all these people out.
Mhm.
And then you know, Biden and Harris being a lot lighter on them because those are the people who are voting for them, right?
Uh,
And so
I don't know, man. I don't think they were like nearly as light as Trump was. Like Trump was almost
no,
supporting
yeah, no, I
supporting what
completely
happened.
yeah,
Yeah.
I agree, but it's like it's still not like it's it's like this is an absolute win for Biden. Like, of course, it's better, but I also think that generally speaking, most reasonable people kind of disagree with Trump right now.
Yeah.
Even like in the Republican Party, which is what I've traditionally supported. I personally can't really agree with much that Trump is doing anymore,
Hmm.
just because he's kind. I don't know. I really think that he's kind of gone a little crazy. Like
Yeah,
you
for
know,
sure.
it's like I can't. agree with what he. I don't know. It's so funny to me how like he really seems like he's going like a little bit off the rocker.
Yeah,
Like it's kind of funny.
like I don't think this is as much a win for Biden as it was a loss for Trump. Like I think Trump is just
Absolutely.
gone. So like he had
Well,
pretty much the entire Republican Party ready to back him on his fraud case, whether they genuinely believed it or not. He had everyone ready to go and fight this fight with him. And then after those events transpired, he sent out his public apology and he's no longer pursuing the fraud case. He's gonna do a peaceful transition of power. Like he's done so. There's no more hope for him because he responded just so poorly.
Hmm.
looking good is that he came up and took charge in a sense, while Trump just laid about and just waited for them to do their thing.
Hmm.
I mean, yeah, it's kind of like as I said, Biden, of course, is going to be a little bit more harsh because it's not like those people were going to be voting for him anyway.
Hmm.
And it's kind of just like a make an example of type situation. But and then Trump just be like, "These guys, just go home, man.
Yeah,
Like,
it's
come
like
on, let's all go home,
yeah.
okay?" It's
My
like,
my parents made a really funny like comparison. It's like when Trump was telling the Proud Boys, stand down and like stay alert and stand down or whatever, and he was being like super supportive of them and like not dismissing him at all because they were voters for him. I feel like it was the same thing here. It's like he just it's just so dumb. He's just blatantly supporting this violent group. Basically, like I love you. Go to bed now. Like it's just like
Or
bruh.
even at the presidential debate, when he was asked to put down the uh, white supremacists,
Mm,
he avoided the question as much as he could and kept bringing up Antifa and never fully actually did it.
yeah, it's yeah.
yeah. I also just real quick, to the five people watching the Twitch right now, you guys can also use the Twitch chat, bring up topics that you want us to talk about or listen to. Viewer participation is super fun, so hit us up.
And
Continue.
another thing this has done is further split the Republican Party. There's already been a massive tear in it with Trump, with those that do and do not support him,
Mm,
and each calling the other no longer Republican.
yeah.
And then with this itself, it creates a split within the group that is a Trump supporter.
Mm,
I honestly think that after like Trump really isn't doing much politically anymore. Like I don't know, he said that he was planning on running in 2024, but whether or not he does that, I think that the next election cycle is just going to kind of be a reset for the Republican Party
I hope
because they're
so.
going to have a
Yeah.
big opportunity to kind of be new, I guess, because
Mm,
Trump's not going to be the figurehead of it anymore. And so, you're going to have your traditional Republican who is a lot less Donald Trump than Donald Trump is, right?
yeah.
And so it's kind of like, you know, I think that that kind of split is going to be somewhat temporary. Maybe it'll affect the election that is going to happen in 2 years. Whether or not that's the case, I guess we'll just have to wait. But personally, I really think that this is going to be some temporary kind of rift between the Republican Party.
Yeah. I mean, one thing to consider though is I was listening to some people talk about this. Like it was a panel of people discussing it, and one person brought up the point that like all it takes to kill a party really is 5% of the voters. If the Republican Party lost 5% of their voters, they're donezo. They're not electing another single person anywhere besides maybe like Alabama or some shit or South Dakota. Right? There's nowhere that is going to be uh, getting Republicans into the offices anymore. They're just done. And if 5% of these people after these events have happened, 5% of the most moderate Republicans just start voting for Democrat, like it's over for them. So uh, I think that not having Trump as like the figurehead will be a huge booster for him, but it is going to take a lot of effort to come back from this, and they're going to have to secure that 5%, or they're going to have to secure what other voters they can get in to make sure they're going to be able to still be a party.
I think that
And
if
even
they introduce somebody who's more moderate and maybe get fucking Mitch McConnell out of there, God, I fucking hate that guy.
Yeah.
I think they'd actually stand a chance. But continue, Brecken.
even with that whole 5% thing, they've also really lost the centrists here.
Hmm.
The centrists are not going to like the Republican Party at the moment.
Yeah.
Because before there was, it's not exactly been the best year for Biden either, because the biggest campaign I've heard for voters to him is settle for Biden.
Hmm.
I haven't ever
Yeah,
legitimately
yeah,
like
I heard that too. Holy fuck.
Yeah.
so he wasn't the best look for centrists, but now Trump looks way worse.
Yeah.
For sure.
So it's not a great situation for either party right now.
Uh, I think Biden is actually like I think the reason why he won by the multiple millions he did is because he really did get a lot of centrists. I think that it's more like really far lefties are super unhappy with Biden right now because he's you can almost consider him a conservative. I mean, you look at like slap Biden in the UK and he's like a conservative candidate. He's not a Democrat. Like he's super centrist on a lot of stuff. And the reason why you hear that like settle for Biden is because there are a lot of leftists who wanted to get like Bernie in the House or Yang in the House or so, or Yang in the presidency, and
Yeah.
they weren't able to do that because those people were too extreme. So they had to settle for Biden, someone who was more agreeable. So I don't think it was the centrists who were having to settle for Biden. I think it was more the extremists that had to settle for Biden. And I think the centrists really liked him. I think that
That's
was a
not what I
very
meant by
easy
that.
vote. Oh, okay.
Here, I'm gonna be right back. I'm gonna go grab something to drink so my throat doesn't
When I
dry
said
out.
settle, I meant all the leftists who I've talked to.
Yeah.
And the thing about Biden wasn't super popular with centrists because he was labeled as a socialist by Trump,
Yeah.
which quick research would easily disprove.
Mm-hmm.
But it was what helped some centrists away from him. And now Trump is pretty much not officially condoning them, but he's definitely not pushing against the violence that just happened at the
Mm-hmm.
Capitol.
Yeah. It makes
So the centrists are not going to be with him at all.
yeah, anyone who's very like torn is that's over for the Republicans at least for this election cycle, probably for the next Senate election cycle as well. The only way I can see the Republicans having a comeback is if they do find someone like Biden, but for the Republicans, just a really centrist, genuine person. Um, I don't see it working out any other way. If they try to go for someone like Trump again, I think it's probably very over for them. But yeah, I think Biden like yeah, he just seems much more appealing to a lot of people than Trump now, especially like dude, the guy Trump is just he makes himself look so bad to everyone besides Republicans, man. Like he's just not a good face for the country or face for anyone who isn't, a Republican. So I think it
Now
will.
he's going to have a much harder time reaching an audience now he's banned from Twitter.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, are you guys talking about the social media bans?
We
Yeah, I
probably just about
caught up
to.
with that sentence.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm really okay. Let me say
Is that a
this,
bird?
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the bird. So when it comes to the social media bans, it honestly really sucks, right? Because it's like I don't know, like Trump's Twitter, of course. I really like, Trump is Trump, right? I really
Hmm.
hope that Biden actually uses Twitter and stuff like that
Yeah.
because I think it's a really awesome political platform for somebody to use, like as a president, because they can just do quick announcements, right? And
Yeah.
everybody's going to see it. But now that Trump doesn't have that, then how are you going to know exactly what he's doing? He would keep,
Well,
the American people updated, but
I mean,
that's also through Trump, so you know how
he's
it is.
he's got like what 2 weeks left in office or something like that. Not a lot of time left in office, and
Yeah,
the
for sure.
man genuinely kind of like incited, you know, the riots to happen a little bit. So you kind
Oh, I
of
agree with the ban. Absolutely,
yeah,
definitely agree with it. But
yeah. So I think
I think
good.
no, go ahead. I was about to change it again.
Okay, but yeah, I was just gonna say like yeah, for anyone who thinks like the social media ban was unjust, I mean you're talking about a political figure, yes, who is the head of our country, but he did genuinely just kind of incite these riots, and that's something we can't really allow on the platform. Just for anyone who was curious about that, it is just for these bans to happen. Trump has gone a bit too far on his social media. It does need to genuinely be taken away, and I'm glad they did. So
I'm actually happy I let you go first because that deals heavily with what I was wanting to transition to. in that how ironic it is that they do want to the right wants to restrict these private businesses and what they are allowed to ban,
Mhm.
while on the flip side, the left wants to stop private companies from not allowing certain people in based on like their sexuality or race or anything. It's like both sides seem to defend a company for stopping certain people from coming in,
Mhm.
but only when it's convenient.
Yeah, it just kind of boils down back to the hypocrisy point, and you don't really care about much unless it supports your viewpoint. So you're gonna have leftists say, ban Nazis. I think most people agree with, banning Nazis, but I don't know. I personally don't. I can get into that at a different time. But
I agree with that not banning Nazis part, but
I think that there are different groups of people and a very large population that is okay with banning certain individuals, and they're always going to push to ban people who they disagree with because it's always beneficial to silence people you disagree with. It's beneficial for you to get your point to more people and for others to not have access to a source of information that might draw them away from your political views. So, no matter what side of the spectrum you're on, I think no matter what, it's always going to be beneficial to advocate for you, the other party, being silenced one way or another.
yeah, I mean, like, when it comes to things like that, I think it's really important for both parties to understand that political discussion is really the lifeblood of our country,
Mm-hmm.
and that whether or not somebody should be banned on Twitter, most of the time they probably shouldn't be. Um, I guess to some people that's debatable, but that's just at least my opinion.
Yeah.
I think it's important that we talk about these issues, and Twitter makes it really easy to do that. And I don't know. I agree with your point on not restricting really anybody, just because that's freedom of speech and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I really hope that you guys are wrong about saying a bunch of like Republicans or Democrats want to silence a lot of other people, because that kind of whole idea is kind of scary to me. You know,
Well, it's just beneficial for their cause. I mean, as a Republican, I would love to silence any kind of extremist Democrat because it's going to make sure less people have access to that ideology, and less people become that way. At least that's what the thought process is, and the same thing vice versa. I want to silence Nazis because they offend people and they are bad for my political cause. Both sides are going to just look at the other side and say, hey, this group of people, I can say they're bad because they've done these things, and I want them silenced, and that's going to be beneficial to me, not necessarily because I'm silencing a bad group of people, but because some ideologies on the other side of the political spectrum are getting less of a voice, just in
yeah.
general. So, like when it comes to like strategic politics, it's always going to be beneficial for both sides to advocate for parts of the other to be silenced. But again,
Well,
personally, I think no one should be silenced.
and it goes beyond just businesses because the right is against free speech when it comes to anything that when people talk against the Constitution or people like burn flags,
Mm-hmm.
that was a major issue. Well, on the flip side, the left is against people saying the N word or anything that could possibly be offensive to someone. They
Mm-hmm.
want to ban. So
Yeah,
both sides want to ban some form of free speech.
yeah, I think it like that's why we have on like a political spectrum, right? We have left and right, and then we have authoritarian, libertarian. I think right now both political parties, though, like the Republicans are a bit more libertarian than the Democrats. I think they're both for their time very authoritarian. Just in general, one's less authoritarian than the other, but they're still both two more authoritarian leaning parties. And I think that silencing speech really just comes from that authoritarian side of politics. There are a lot of people who agree that freedom of speech should be valued, but again, a lot of politicians and stuff are going to advocate for silencing it because it's useful to them strategically, and they're going to come up with arguments that can convince regular people of that as well. So,
I'll be right back.
or just it's kind of a interesting topic when it comes to stuff like that. Whether or not it's going to be silenced, right? Like I personally don't agree with Brecken when it comes to how Republicans want to silence and ban things like speech against the Constitution or flag burning. I really think that the vast majority of Republicans, believe in freedom of expression. I think that's the vast majority of Americans.
Uh,
It doesn't matter.
there
It's
there
like
are yeah. It
I really don't think there are going to be a lot of people in the Democratic Party who want to ban the use of the N word outright
mhm,
because that's just complete censorship. And
yeah.
I think that when it comes to stuff like that, there are going to be a lot of really outspoken people who say they want these things banned.
Mhm,
But I think that most Americans who are just regular Joes just really want, they value things like freedom of speech and stuff like that. Flag burning, you're going to have people who get really upset at that, of course.
yeah.
But it's also your right to, if they acknowledge the Constitution, then they also have to acknowledge freedom of expression, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's more just like there's some movements on the right that want to like prevent people from burning a flag or prevent people from saying certain things, and there are movements on the left that want to, silence people who misgender people, and they want to silence people from saying offensive language, that kind of stuff. I don't think it's a widely accepted opinion, but I do think that it is something they advocate for, and there is a reason behind them advocating for it over just they think it's wrong. It's a strategic kind of play to
Hmm.
silence your opponent.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess I've never really thought about that before. At least to me, discussion is really important when it comes to topics like this. So
Hmm.
when it comes to silencing people, I guess I just really haven't given it a lot of thought.
Yeah.
It's the
It
reason we
doesn't.
have multiple parties.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I I'm I to bring back a topic, right? I'm really kind of very interested to see how the Republican Party is going to move forward with this because I think that if they play their cards right, they can be a force to be reckoned with in the next coming election. If
Hmm.
they get some guy who's just moderate, not crazy, who has regular policies and stuff, but if they play it wrong and they have another kind of Trump guy, I think it could really be it for the Republican Party.
Yeah, for sure.
What do you guys think about that?
The Republican Party needs to take an official stance on the Capitol. They can either fully condemn uh, the actions there, which will alienate part of their own party, or if they don't it, which hopefully not, they're going to lose all the centrists and still much of the Republican Party.
Hmm.
I think that if they were playing for the long game, then of course, um, saying that what happened at the Capitol isn't good. That's going to be the play for them right now.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It kind of baffles me because it's just kind of common sense, right? But then they're gonna just be like, nah, this was awesome, guys. Great work at using your voice and protesting. Like
Hmm.
I somehow can imagine a future where that happens.
Hmm.
Whether or not that's like maybe I'm just a cynic right now when it comes to the Republican Party because as I said, I used to support it pretty heavily,
Yeah.
and they're just being run by idiots.
Yeah.
And so, maybe I'm just being a cynic, but I really think that is a possibility. I don't know if you
It
guys agree with me on
it's
that, but
possible. I like a lot of Republicans and a lot of like senators and stuff have already taken a stance against it. I think it's going to come down to like an individual thing. I don't think like you can really ask a party to take an official stance because the party leader is really the president, and even then, like just that one person's opinion. It's not like there's a council of Republicans that get together and discuss what the official Republican Party opinion is going to be. It's more just members of the group can have their own opinions, and I think right now the trend is more along the lines of disagreeing with it and thinking that the protests were a bad thing. So I think that the Republicans will be able to recover. It's more a matter of did this event cost them that 5% of voters? I'm not sure. I
I don't think so.
I don't think so either necessarily. Then mostly because people don't usually change their opinions that fast about this kind of thing. And centrists 4 years from now, honestly, probably won't even really think about this event. I think that it's definitely a historical event, but I don't think it's gonna make too much of a difference in the long term. So
Well, yeah, you don't like when you're voting for Joe Biden, you don't really think of things like, well, I guess this is an extreme example, but you don't think about things like Selma or Martin Luther King when you vote for a Democrat.
yeah.
It's like, I think that especially with this kind of thing, it's more of just a drop in the bucket.
Hmm.
I might be wrong with that. I guess only time will tell, but like honestly, people probably won't even care in like a month that this even happened.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
doubt that.
Especially
'Cause
with,
it's,
well, see, the reason I say that is just because society's moving so fast right now. There's always
yeah.
going to be something new.
but this is such a massive breach of national security.
I mean, yeah, like
Yeah, that
changes are
is
gonna
true.
happen and stuff, but I think it's gonna have largely the same kind of effect the BLM protested, where it's bringing this talking point to fruition, and it's not the talking point the protesters wanted to, like the BLM were able to do. It's talking about how dog shit Trump is basically. Um, they brought that to the limelight and give it another month. I mean, I haven't heard about the BLM protests in a very long time, besides just debating it on like political platforms. Even then, they've kind of been out of conversation for a while up until this happened, and now they're being brought back because we can make comparisons between them and this, right? But if this didn't happen, I don't think those protests would be in the news anytime soon. Maybe on like the
Hmm.
anniversary or something, but realistically, all of this stuff does just kind of get swept under the rug, and it is just another drop in the bucket. Like,
Yeah, and even so, the BLM protests, like, really, if you think about it, the BLM protests, like, kind of, I don't know, I guess it's up to opinion, but at least in my opinion, the BLM protests are it's like this, the Capitol riot was like a dog, right?
mm,
But then the BLM protest was like a lion. It was a lot bigger. It was a lot more ferocious, and like I think it really would have hurt the Democratic Party a lot more than how much this hurt the Republican Party. And you can clearly see when it comes to how our election turned out that it really didn't even hurt them much at all, right?
mm,
Um, it's as I said, I don't know if it will really matter in the long run.
yeah. And hello, comrade Andrew. But yeah. So
Wait,
it
wait,
translates
let me.
to
Yeah.
hello,
It
comrade.
translates to hello, comrade.
Yeah,
I was waiting for a
Oh,
break to say that myself.
yeah. So
okay.
yeah, it's
I, right now, I think is the best time we've had since Theodore Roosevelt, for the third party to get something because there's strain in both parties right now,
mm,
with Biden not being a popular candidate for them, and then also the right being split as it is between its candidate. So now's the best time we've ever had for that.
mm, yeah. I think that yeah. Bottom line, it's just it'll affect obviously this election. It'll probably affect the next election, but it'll I think it'll allow for someone new to take office, which is definitely going to be a big plus. Well, that is if the Republicans are able to reelect, right? So,
Chat says, "How are you?"
Yeah. This is
all right. I think I'm going to wrap up this recording real quick, as I think we're getting a bit off topic. So, thank
I
you all
think
for
that I
watching.
think that we covered everything that
Yeah,
really we meant to.
yeah, for sure. So, thank you. This has been Tolerable Politics, episode 3. Um, appreciate you guys for coming here. Please like, follow, subscribe, whatever you can. This will be posted up on YouTube if you weren't able to catch the whole thing. And yeah, appreciate it, and thanks for watching.
Dude, buggers, man.